Hey Merfolk fans, Joe here. Thanks very much for joining me. Some of you may have noticed I haven't really been uploading anything in the last month or so, and that is because I was traveling pretty much all of August. I got married and went on my honeymoon, and now I'm back working again and playing some Magic again, trying to adjust to the slightly different metagame landscape in Modern. There's a lot more Death Shadow aggro around, otherwise known as Suicide Zoo or Zooicide, and there's a ton of Dredge these days. The deck has gotten supercharged. I guess there's a new card in Shadows over Innistrad called Prized Amalgam. It's just another great graveyard creature similar to Bloodghast that comes back to the graveyard if certain conditions are met. So I'm just going to take a look at the opponent's opening hand and sort of outline what it is that Dredge is trying to do for those of you who are a little bit less familiar with the Dredge mechanic and the sort of interactions that exist in the deck. At its very basic, the deck is trying to get a ton of cards off the top of the library, usually, into the graveyard. It also has ways of discarding cards from its hand into the graveyard. And the reason it wants to do that is because some of these cards have either the flashback ability, which lets you cast the spell from the graveyard, so that's a source of card advantage, or cards have something like the Dredge ability, which allows you to put more cards into the graveyard off the top of the library, or something like Bloodghast, which has the landfall ability, and whenever you play a land, this guy comes from the graveyard directly back onto the battlefield. His casting cost with double black can be a little tricky to hit if you don't have the perfect lands, but if he's in the graveyard, it's the simplest thing to get him onto the battlefield. All you need to do is play a land. Even just crack a fetch land gets him onto the battlefield. So very quickly, just let me explain what the Dredge mechanic actually does. So in this case, Golgari Grave Troll has Dredge and then the number 6. So the rules text for Dredge says something like, if you would draw a card, instead put the top 6 cards of your library into your graveyard and move this card, in this case Golgari Grave Troll, to your hand. So you replace your draw for the turn by bringing this creature from your graveyard to your hand, and you get to put 6 cards into your graveyard, fueling those kinds of synergies that I was outlining a moment ago. Narcomoeba has the text, when it's put into your graveyard directly from your library, you can put it onto the battlefield. So Narcomoeba is a little bit awkward because most Dredge lists only run, I think, a single land that can produce blue, usually single Steam Vents that they can grab with one of their fetch lands. So if the opponent gets stuck with a Narcomoeba in hand, it's usually just a dead card that they're going to use to satisfy the discard condition of Faithless Looting if they don't have any other better options. Narcomoeba is also kind of dead in the graveyard because it doesn't have Dredge and it doesn't have any kind of cool ability like Bloodghast where it can come back from the graveyard to the battlefield. So Faithless Looting costs 1 red. Now, you guys are certainly familiar with this, I'm sure, but it gets massive value in this deck. On turn 1, they get to draw 2 cards, and at this point, you know, they've seen 9 cards, and they get to put the 2 best graveyard cards directly into the graveyard on turn 1. And that's, in this case, going to be probably Golgari Grave Troll and Bloodghast. Grave Troll will let him get his Dredge going on as early as turn 2, and Bloodghast will come back when he makes his next land drop, and he'll get to start attacking. So that's sort of the gist of Dredge. Let's look for a second at Conflagrate. Unfortunately, this card has a glitch in Cockatrice, and so we'll have to look at the text description. The flashback cost is really what Dredge is playing this card for. The non-flashback cost, the way to cast it out of your hand is actually really clunky. You pay 1 red and then double X. So if you tap 7 mana, X is 3. And then in the case of, X equaling 3, Conflagrate will deal 3 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures or players. So 7 mana for 3 damage seems pretty terrible, right? But the flashback cost, if they can manage to get Conflagrate into the graveyard, they only pay 2 red, and then they get to discard as many cards as they want into the graveyard. Now remember, discarding is very similar in Dredge to drawing cards. This essentially says pay 2 red, draw a bunch of cards, and deal that amount of damage to creatures. So if he has 6 or 7 cards in their hand, pay 2 red, discard 6 or 7 cards to flashback Conflagrate. And if I have 2 Lords and a Cursecatcher, they can just wipe my board while massively furthering their own game plan. So Conflagrate, a very scary card, but interesting to note that it's weak after the first copy, because once they flashed it back and discarded their hand, for the rest of the game they're pretty much going to have probably 1 or 2 cards in their hand, and so they won't be able to deal a ton of damage with it like they did the first time. So it sort of goes from being like an overpowered Anger of the Gods to being more like a Lightning Bolt or something like that, or a Forked Bolt. So having all these pieces in his hand along with 2 lands, hitting all of his important colors, this is an easy keep for the opponent. Finally, taking a look at my hand, I've got 3 non-island blue sources, so good on mana, little weak on creatures, only have 1 Cursecatcher and 1 Merrow Reejerey. But I do have some interaction. It could slow the opponent down while I hopefully draw into more Merfolk. I've got a Vapor Snag here and an Echoing Truth. I'll explain why I'm playing Vapor Snag these days in a different video. I'm not going to talk about that right now. So 2 keeps. My hand is a little weak, but it's not a mulligan. So I'll lead with Cursecatcher. And now the opponent sees that I'm on Merfolk. So rather than lead with Faithless Looting like I was suggesting he might do, I think what he did instead is he's going to cast Conflagrate with X equaling 0, just to get it into the graveyard, because that's exactly where he wants it. If I start to threaten a bunch of lords flooding the table, he can cast Conflagrate, discard his hand, and just keep my board totally empty. A very powerful card in the Dredge deck. So the opponent, that's what he did for his turn. I drew a Master of Waves, which if I can hit a 4th land is going to be great, if I can survive to the 4th turn. Attack for 1, and without a 2-drop, I just pass the turn back to the opponent, leaving up Vapor Snag and Echoing Truth, though I don't know how useful those are going to be right now. After playing his 2nd land, able to pay for Cursecatcher's ability if I chose to try to counter it, the opponent draws 2 Stinkweed Imps and gets to discard a Grave Troll and probably the Bloodghast. I'm going to open up the graveyard over here since it plays very similarly to a normal deck's hand, so it's important that we see what cards he has in there. Right, he already played his land for the turn, so Bloodghast doesn't get to come back this turn. And the sequencing, it's important to note, he played his land first, because even though he had a Bloodghast in hand, because he had to play around Cursecatcher. If I sacked the Cursecatcher, that would set him back tempo-wise a lot, because he would then have to flashback Faithless Looting, paying 3 mana instead of 1. If I didn't have the Cursecatcher on the board, he could have saved his land drop, played Faithless Looting, discard Bloodghast, then play his land. Bloodghast would now be on the battlefield. So Cursecatcher doing a little bit of work that could otherwise go unnoticed if I actually look really closely about what's happening. So I did draw that 4th land. Pretty nice, though I'm afraid because this is a kind of slow against Dredge. And they do have that Conflagrate in the yard, which is just unfortunate because he can choose next turn to wipe my board if he wants to. But I'm not going to let that stop me from running out Merrow Reejerey. So swing for 2. The opponent takes it, goes down to 17, and for his draw step, he's going to Dredge Golgari Grave Troll. So I'll go ahead and pause it when he gets to his 6 cards. To be really clear about what's happening, during your draw step, the rules say you get to draw 1 card. And Dredge, the Dredge ability says if you would draw a card, instead you can take this card to your hand, Grave Troll, and put 6 cards from your library into your graveyard. And let's go ahead and look at what's going to his graveyard, see if he gets any value here. Now, I mentioned earlier I think that the 2nd Conflagrate is weak because you have to discard all your cards for the first one. So he's getting a 2nd Conflagrate, not amazing. Rally the Peasants, really only useful for its flashback cost since I don't think they even have white mana in the deck. Creatures get +2, +0 until the end of turn for your flashback. So the instant speed, pump effect, Tormenting Voice is garbage in the graveyard, and lands are garbage unless you happen to have Life from the Loam, which we see he doesn't right now, and then a Faithless Looting, which you can flashback. So pretty modest value off of that Dredge. So he's going to take Golgari Grave Troll back to his hand, and we see he currently doesn't have any other Dredgers in the graveyard. And with 3 mana up, he can flashback Conflagrate, though, and discard Grave Troll again, getting a Dredger back into the graveyard to fuel his next draw step. Okay, so we see that he's tapping 2 red mana and discarding the 2 Narcomoebas and a Grave Troll. Interesting that he would discard the Narcomoebas since they're dead in the graveyard. I would think maybe he would discard Stinkweed Imps for their Dredge ability, but he can also cast these guys at this point. And they essentially have Death Touch. It says when they deal combat damage, destroy that creature. If they deal combat damage to a creature. Alright, so the opponent's going to get to Conflagrate my Merrow Reejerey and Cursecatcher. 2 to Reejerey, 1 to Cursecatcher. I'm going to sack the Cursecatcher, make him pay 1, and yeah, he does. He pays the 1. Wipes my board, pretty sad. Gets to keep his Dredge going by discarding Grave Troll. And now Conflagrate will be exiled, and I'll go to my turn. So I hit a Spreading Seas, which is interesting because if I just run out of Master of Waves, that guy's pretty little. He's the only creature I have right now. So I think it's a fairly obvious choice here, especially with the interaction in my hand, giving me some time. I'll play the Spreading Seas out now. I'll hit his black mana, just to see what I draw, and then when I finally do run out Master of Waves, I'll at least have a little bit more devotion on the board. I hit an AEther Vial, a little bit weird. I would have preferred a creature, so I'm going to have to reveal Master of Waves to get those Wanderwine Hub untapped. I'll play the AEther Vial and pass with Vapor Snag up. So the opponent is going to Dredge. I'll pause it again when he hits his 6 card so we can take a quick look at it. It's 4, 5, 6. So again, a pretty bad Dredge. He only hits 4 lands and then 2 more Dredgers in the Grave Trolls. Really, he wants to be seeing gas cards like Bloodghasts and Prized Amalgams. And maybe Haunted Dead. So all that stuff goes into the graveyard. The Golgari Grave Troll goes to his hand. And with 3 mana up, I think the only option here is to cast a flashback Faithless Looting. You know, we can see here how great the card advantage is in the Dredge deck. I mean, he only has these 3 spells in his deck. I just took him off black mana so he can't cast his creatures, but he can keep casting spells that he threw into the graveyard off the top of his library. So here is a Faithless Looting. He's going to draw... Okay, so he's going to draw 1 card, and then he's going to choose for his second draw to replace that draw by dredging one of the Grave Trolls. And I'll pause it again at 6, since that's the number that's getting dredged. And this is a much more powerful Dredge 6. We see another Dredger, which you always want in the graveyard, and then 2 Prized Amalgams, who can come directly to the battlefield from the graveyard, and a Haunted Dead, which you can pay a cost and bring him back to the graveyard. So, very nice Dredge there. And then he has to discard the 2 to Faithless Looting after he's drawn. And so, of course, he puts his Grave Troll back in, and well, I guess he put 2 Grave Trolls. He had one, and he drew a second one, something like that. I don't know. It's easy to lose track of this stuff. Okay, so since the opponent played a land and there was a Bloodghast, the Bloodghast came back onto the battlefield with landfall, and now he's going to get to bring back 2 Prized Amalgams. And we can go ahead and look at the text here so you guys can know what this does. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, if it entered from the graveyard or you cast it from the graveyard, you return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped at the beginning of the next end step. So if Bloodghast comes back from the graveyard, then any of these guys that are in the graveyard will come along with him. Very strong card. It's a 3/3, very aggressive. But they enter tapped, which is fine since I don't have any pressure. On the end step, I Vapor Snag his Bloodghast. First of all, because he doesn't have double black, since I have Spreading Seas out. Secondly, because I have an Echoing Truth that can deal with multiple Prized Amalgams. I remind the opponent to take 1 from Vapor Snag. And I'll go ahead to my turn. So I still didn't hit a creature. And at this point, I have a choice again between whether to run Master of Waves out or to hold him out, to hold him up in the hopes that I draw into some more blue devotion. AEther Vial is on 1, and if I draw into a 2-drop, the deck has a lot of 2-drops. If I hit 1, I'll get to Vial it in, and then cast Master of Waves and get 4 tokens instead of the 2 that I would get right now. So I think the choice here this turn is to leave mana up and hopefully just bounce some stuff back to his hand. Now remember, they want most of their stuff in their graveyard. Prized Amalgam is pretty bad in their hand. But the opponent does have black and blue mana. It's interesting. They could cast one of these guys. So reading his cards. Make sure that I'm up on what's going on. I think this is where things got a little bit sketchy in the game. He's going to replace his draw for the draw step. I'll pause it at 6 again. Okay. All right. So we can see he's replacing his draw step with the Golgari Grave Troll Dredge, which we've seen plenty of times already. It's another good dredge. He hits a Haunted Dead, Life from the Loam, which will let him get lands back, and a Bloodghast, which I've explained already comes back with landfall. But what the opponent does here, if you watch, is after having dredged these 6, he proceeds as if he gets another draw for the turn. And instead of taking that draw, he chooses to dredge Life from the Loam. A little bit strange and sort of cheaty. It's like drawing 2 cards. So when he gets Life from the Loam, he doesn't have any lands in his hand. He's going to get to play Life from the Loam and draw a bunch of lands, which will allow him to keep fueling Bloodghasts. So let's see how this plays out. So for whatever reason, maybe he's just rushing and he doesn't realize what he's doing. He dredges Life from the Loam and Golgari Grave Troll. Very strange. And we see it's another super strong dredge. He hits another Dredger, a Faithless Looting with flashback, and another Prized Amalgam. So he's going to he chose to take these 2 cards to his hand, and instead of dredging 6, he's going to get to dredge 8. I didn't notice this during the game. There's so much complicated stuff going on. I was frantically scrolling up and down. If you guys are playing against a dredge opponent, please don't hesitate to call a judge if you feel like some shady stuff is going on. Maybe before you call a judge, you can ask the opponent to explain himself, but if you don't get it, call a judge over. It's so different from normal decks. And we see he just drew 2 cards for his draw step, which is really shady. Now the opponent is attacking for 6 here. I had a choice of whether to Echoing Truth now or to wait and hit the other Prized Amalgam in his graveyard. And since he has a Bloodghast, I'm expecting him to have a land in his hand. He'll play it, get the Bloodghast, get the Prized Amalgam, and I'll bounce all 3 back to his hand. Not a ton of pressure right now, and if I get to bounce all 3 of these guys, it should slow him down quite a bit. I'm going to take the 6 here. Not 100% sure if that's the strongest play or not. The opponent is going to get to cast this cheated Life from the Loam. This shouldn't be in his hand until next turn, and if he wants to dredge it, he has to dredge it on his draw step. But he has it illegally in his hand, and he's casting it right now. During the game, I didn't realize what had happened, so I let him resolve it. And he's going to take 3 lands back to his hand. So there they go. Opponent has a stocked hand, a stocked graveyard, and now he has lands to play to get Bloodghasts onto the battlefield. So he's going to tap his 2 remaining mana. Let's see what's happening here. Tapped his lands, put Bloodghast from his hand into the graveyard, and put Stinkweed Imp into his graveyard. So he used his 2 remaining mana, including the black mana, to bring Haunted Dead back to the battlefield using its ability. 1 black, 1 generic, discard 2 cards. And that's a very strong ability in this deck, to put things from your hand into your graveyard. Return Haunted Dead from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped, and it brings along a Spirit token. So let's see here. I think the Haunted Dead was also hit, though he hit 1 on the first dredge and 1 on the second dredge off of the Life from the Loam. Saying the Haunted Dead got hit off of the cheaty dredge. Alright, so gets a Spirit token, is going to play a land, gets 2 Bloodghasts. And he didn't have the land without the illegal Life from the Loam. So he gets a Bloodghast, gets the Prized Amalgams, and here's the Echoing Truth to get rid of these Prized Amalgams. I'm just doing the best that I can against this crazy deck. It's even harder when the opponent cheats. So AEther Vial goes to 2. I did hit a 2-drop. That was sort of my fingers crossed hope. Bounce the Haunted Dead. The opponent now has 8 cards in hand. I'll just follow up with Master of Waves. I'll get my 4 tokens and pass back to the opponent. It looks like rather than dredge, they're going to draw for their turn. I think that's what I remembered happening here. So they hit Insolent Neonate. It's interesting. I guess that drawing a 9th card gives him the choice of discarding more cards, right? We see he has another Haunted Dead in his graveyard, so he gets a discard if he activates that ability. So again, without that life from the loam, I suppose he could have dredged it this turn, and then he would have been able to cast it and then had lands. But the Bloodghast shouldn't be on the battlefield right now. They just should not be. And the prized amalgams, let's see. One of them should probably still be in the graveyard. So we see 3 mana, flashing back a Faithless Looting, leaving the black up. He drew 2 cards, another Bloodghast and a Wooded Foothills. He's going to discard a Haunted Dead and the one that I bounced and a prized amalgam. So 9 cards in hand. He plays a mountain, leaving up 3 mana. Attacks with the Bloodghast. I really don't want to block these guys because they go to the graveyard and then they just come right back. I felt like I was at a relatively healthy life total, so I just take the 4. Going to the end step, the opponent has to discard 1. I didn't quite realize, so I went to my draw step. But then we see that he discarded another Bloodghast, which is actually really tricky. I think, actually, in retrospect, again, that the life from the loam being dredged illegally gave him that extra card. At this point, he would have had 7 cards on his end step and wouldn't have gotten to discard a Bloodghast. But we'll see. Bloodghast actually, makes for some fireworks this turn, and we'll get to it in a moment. I'll tap 3, run Reejerey out, do a little bit of math, but I see that he's got a lot of stuff that can enter the battlefield here. He's got a Haunted Dead that he can pay for, and he'll get to discard some of those prized amalgams that I bounced. During the actual match, I didn't quite realize the extent of what the opponent could do with this particular board state. So I chose to attack with 3 elementals, I think, and a Harbinger, leaving back a couple of guys for blocks if absolutely necessary. I didn't really think they would be necessary. But that was a mistake. I did think through the possibility of top decking an Island Walk Lord. In that situation, I could cast the Island Walk Lord, use Reejerey to tap any blocker that he has up. I mean, Bloodghast can't even block. But tap anybody who can block, and then I could swing with Island Walk with the Spreading Seas for 3 plus 4 plus 4 is 11. But the opponent's at 14. The Elementals could potentially squeeze in some more damage, but I felt I needed to do something this turn. So I turned some guys sideways, probably more than I should have. And the opponent just takes the 9, goes all the way down to 5, and that's a little bit worrying. So he's going to start here by tapping 2 mana and discarding the 2 prized amalgams. To bring back Haunted Dead, gets another Spirit token. He's then going to crack his fetch land, grabs a mountain out of his deck, and Bloodghast comes back. And then because Haunted Dead and Bloodghast entered from the graveyard, 3 more prized amalgams come back. I'm pretty sure a lot of this would have been prevented had the opponent not illegally dredged an extra card earlier in the game. So I'm just doing my best. Now that was dirty. That was really dirty. The opponent drew a card and then undid his draw like it was an accident. So he saw that he would have drawn a land. I guess I'm going to assume it was a mistake, but still, you don't draw your card in Dredge accidentally and then undo it, and now he's dredging life from the loam. So he's dredging 3. There's another, it's a Narc Amoeba off the top of the deck, straight to the battlefield. He cracks his fetch land, and I just tell him, I think you've got it. So as I mentioned a couple times, I didn't notice the illegal play during the game, but it was certainly made, and I think that it contributed in a big way toward the outcome of that game. Let's go ahead to game 2. Now my sideboarding plan for this matchup, I currently have 3 Relic of Progenitus in the board because Dredge is getting a lot more popular, and I've just been realizing that Relic of Progenitus is really strong against Jund and really strong against Junk. Any deck that tries to get any value out of its graveyard, Relic of Progenitus, if it comes out early, can keep them off of all that value for pretty much the whole game. It can do such a great job. And then in the end, it just cycles itself. So I've got 3 of those in here. I'll have to think about what it was that I took out exactly. I didn't draw any of my hate, any of the relics, but this is a great Merfolk hand, so I can't possibly mulligan this. Looking at the opponent's side, we see he's got 3 lands, 2 Faithless Looting, and Insolent Neonate. This is a cool one because it lets the opponent discard a card. I mentioned a few times that that's actually a bonus to this deck. They get to choose, for example, a Stinkweed Imp to discard and get their Dredge engine going and get more and more stuff in the graveyard. Insolent Neonate, you have to sacrifice him, discard a card, and then it lets you draw a card. Now remember, you can replace any card draw, even this one, with a Dredge effect. So if you discard a Dredge card, that's the cost for this ability. And then for the actual benefit of the ability, you can Dredge one of the spells that you just discarded. So a really, really synergistic card. And I think that these are 2 easy keeps. I'm going to open with Wanderwine Hub, revealing Silvergill, since that guy's probably coming out soon, and then AEther Vial. Looks like the opponent drew a Golgari Grave Troll for their turn. I'm going to play Blood Crypt untapped, and just thinking about what he wants to do. He's going to get stuff in the graveyard no matter what. But he's going to go with Faithless Looting, drawing 2 more cards, and then he'll get to discard whichever 2 he wants. Probably a Grave Troll and a Stinkweed Imp. Okay, there they are. Strong first play by the Dredge player. Hit a Vapor Snag. That's a welcome piece of interaction in the matchup. And with AEther Vial up, I'll be able to leave some mana up later in the game, since my creatures are going to come into the battlefield just with the AEther Vial. At this point, it's too early to try to mana screw the opponent. He could easily have plenty of lands in his hand. So I'm going to try to establish a clock at this point. I play the Silvergill and reveal the Merrow Reejerey. And I hit another Reejerey. It's always nice seeing 2 of these guys. You can get so many tapping and untapping shenanigans going on. During their draw step, the opponent is going to Dredge 6 with Golgari Grave Troll. I'll pause it on the 6 so we can look at it. He hits a Blood Crypt, Copperline Gorge, Life from the Loam, that's a good one. Faithless Looting is another good one. Conflagrate is a great one. As we saw last game, he can take me off of early creature advantage by blowing up my board and discarding his hand. So that's a pretty solid Dredge 6. The Golgari Grave Troll is going to go to his hand. He's going to cast Faithless Looting here. A little bit reckless because I could have brought a Cursecatcher in with AEther Vial. So he's going to... So for the first draw, he's going to Dredge Life from the Loam. He's replacing the first draw with Dredge 3. And so he dredges another Dredger and then 2 pieces of Artifact Hate. I think most of the hate cards against Dredge are either enchantments or artifacts. We see Nature's Claim can hit artifact or enchantments, and Ancient Grudge can only hit artifacts. I know he predicted correctly because I did bring in my 3 relics, and he can always just hit AEther Vial if he wants to. Ancient Grudge has a flashback of 1 green, and I have to say, I was actually surprised. I don't think he didn't cast that this turn. I would have been all over that if I was him. So that was the first draw for Faithless Looting, replaced by dredging Life from the Loam, and now he's going to dredge Stinkweed Imp, going for 5 more. We see he hits a Bloodghast and a Prized Amalgam and a Narcomoeba. So good dredging all around. He's going to take these 2 to his hand, and now he has to discard 2 to Faithless Looting. Discards Grave Troll, makes sense, and a Stinkweed Imp. So very logical line of play there. Opponent already has 16 cards in the graveyard. Has plenty of lands to play in his hand. Narcomoeba on the table. And yeah, it's going to choose not to flash back. Where did that spell go? The Ancient Grudge. Gets an untapped Stomping Grounds. Now what is he doing here? Gotta remember. Okay, so he's going to play Insolent Neonate. Seems like a misstep to me. He does... Okay, so I remind him that he missed his landfall trigger since he played a card before bringing in the Bloodghast off of the landfall, or the land that he played. And Bloodghast, of course, brings Prized Amalgam. I tell him you missed your trigger on the Bloodghast, but it's okay. Now, if you're in a competitive environment, do not play Takesies Backsies with Dredge, okay? Like, if the opponent plays a land and then plays Insolent Neonate, they can no longer bring back Bloodghast. They missed their landfall trigger because they took a game action in between when they played their land and when they wanted Bloodghast's trigger to activate. So we get the choice of whether or not we put that trigger on the stack, and of course we would just say no, it's a missed trigger. No Bloodghast and no Prized Amalgam for you. So my Aether Vial, obviously, tick it up to 2, and at this point I have no choice, really, for what to do with my my mana. I really only have Spreading Seas. I guess I could use a Vapor Snag, but that seems really inefficient. I see that he has the Ancient Grudge in his graveyard, so I think at this point I'm going to take him off of that green mana. And I do. Alright, I drew into an island, which is great because I'm a little bit jammed up on blue mana. Now I do have Vapor Snag up because of the island, and I have Island Walk available, so no time like the present to start beating the opponent's face. He thinks he can block, but he really can't because of Island Walk, like a boss. Takes 3, goes down to 12. So, end of second main, he puts Stinkweed Imp from his hand into the graveyard and sacrifices Insolent Neonate. Now he gets to draw a card. Let's see if he does in fact draw a card or if he replaces it with a Dredge. Oh, so he's going to Dredge 6. All good. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we'll pause. Another Prized Amalgam. This is a pretty weak Dredge, but he's going to get a Narcomoeba, but I've got Island Walk online, so a 1-1 flyer is not great at this point. Losing another piece of artifact hate, but doesn't have green mana anyway. So, pretty good Dredge, the Prized Amalgam, but and the Narcomoeba. Otherwise, not too much value, though. Now, hang on a sec. What just happened there? Okay. This is interesting. This is an interaction I didn't quite pick up on, I think, during the game. When Narcomoeba is put into a graveyard, it's not a replacement effect. It's a triggered ability. It doesn't say if Narcomoeba would be put into your graveyard, instead put it onto the battlefield. It does go to the graveyard, and then it enters the battlefield, so it does trigger the Prized Amalgams. So Narcomoeba, that much better in the Dredge deck. Better than I thought, even. So the opponent untaps, and of course he's just going to keep on dredging. See more artifact hate, more and more and more. So he's got a Conflagrate. Seems pretty strong. Hit another Bloodghast. No green mana still, and yeah, so again, kind of average, although he can deal 4 damage. He could wipe my board right now if he wanted to with that Conflagrate. Let's see what happened. Attacks with all the guys. I'm going to Vapor Snag one of those Amalgams, I think. And I'll just take 7. Go down to 13. Opponent takes 1 from the Vapor Snag. Goes down to 11. Oh, you know what? He doesn't have double red. So he can't cast Conflagrate with its flashback cost, because it costs double red. That's pretty funny, actually. The greedy mana base coming back to bite the opponent in the butt. So because he played a land, Bloodghast triggers from the graveyard and comes to the battlefield. I'm going to put Aether Vial on 3, and if I happen to draw into a Merfolk right now, it would be great because then I could untap Aether Vial and just get multiple Aether Vial activations. So I hit a land. I think that's still good enough. Yeah, it is, because you can bring 1 in with Aether Vial, cast another, untap a land, and then if I want to attack with Mutavault, I can do that, or I can just cast Spreading Seas. Since the opponent's pretty choked up on mana, I actually think the Spreading Seas line is the better one to take here. So play a second Reejerey, untap Mutavault, because I was still thinking at this point about whether I wanted to attack or not. Bloodghast can't block. I can swing with these guys for quite a lot. I think it's 9 for those guys, 5 and 4. In the end, I see that he's having trouble with his mana, so let's go ahead and take him off that Blood Crypt. I'll get to draw another card. Hit a Harbinger, that's going to be solid. And attack. Ah, man. Did I really do that? I should have attacked with Master of the Pearl Trident as well, but I had Overkill next turn, but that's no excuse. Bloodghast can't block. And he's not even that big. I'm a 4/4. Why didn't I attack? The opponent took 5. I don't know what he's going to do at this point. I guess he has to draw. He has to hit land. Nobody can't even do anything with land. So he hits the Insolent Neonate and chose to give up. Just starts drawing a bunch of cards. So we kept the opponent off double red for Conflagrate without even meaning to, really. Excuse me. And then just took him off any red at all. So that seems to be a good idea in the matchup, especially if they're playing Conflagrate, which I imagine most Dredge decks are. So strong Merfolk game, did make a mistake not attacking with the Master, but whatever. I got punished last game when he flooded the board on my end step. I didn't think that was going to happen this game, but since I had crazy overkill, I figured, you know, maybe my line of thought was, let's hold up another blocker. Whatever the thought process was, Merfolk kicked some butt that game. Go ahead and watch the last game. Opening hands, good for me. Silvergill and Spreading Seas off of the colorless in blue. No AEther Vial, but they have lots of artifact hate, so no AEther Vial is not the biggest liability. Let's look at this hand. He's got all of his colors. He's got Insolent Neonate, Faithless Looting, a Dredger, Prized Amalgam. Looks like an easy keep from where I'm sitting. I think maybe he wanted artifact hate, because the opponent mulliganed this hand. And I think this just shows the opponent maybe has not played as much Magic as I have. Because I brought in some hate against them, and I would love to see it, but I'm not going to mulligan this hand. There's zero way that I'm going to mulligan this hand. I could mulligan this and get something with no lands, and I'd be on 5 cards. But I guess the Dredge players are really afraid of hate. So we see he went to 6. That's just stupid. I'm sorry. That was a terrible decision by the opponent. Goes to 6 and hits no lands, exactly like I just said. So he has to go straight to 5. And yeah, against this hand, the opponent's not going to get anywhere. He got his artifact hate. Good for you. But he's got no dredgers. He's looking at the top card. He's probably going to put at the bottom just because he doesn't have anything he can even draw at this point. Maybe he wants to hit... God, I don't even know. He's turns behind at this point with that hand. So I hit a 3rd land. Couldn't ask for more there. Opponent hits a land. Doesn't really do anything. My turn. Hit another land. I'm going to get even Master Waves online. This hand is developing just sensationally. I'm going to play Spreading Seas. The opponent isn't going to wait for me to choose a target. He's going to try to destroy it before it even resolves. So he's floating green. Spreading Seas will, of course, resolve because it can't be... This thing targets artifacts or enchantments. You can't target it if it hasn't resolved. So if it resolves, I get to draw a card. It'll resolve. I'll draw a card. I'll gain 4 life off the Nature's Claim. Yep. And it looks like I drew an Island Walk Lord. Pretty good. Merrow Reejerey is going to let me go bonkers next turn. Opponent draws another land. I mean, he gets to play a Prized Amalgam, but that's certainly not going to be enough. Yeah. Reejerey, another land, attacks for 3, and yeah, I can do whatever I want at this point. I happen to draw another blue source, so I could even play all of my double blue if I want, with the help of Reejerey. So we're going to see Lord on tap, Lord on tap, Harbinger, bounce, swing for 4, opponent draws a Grave Troll, and what can he do? See a Prized Amalgam coming to the battlefield. After I bounced him on my turn. But I mean, if we take a quick glance here, this is 4, 4, 4, and 5. If he blocks the 5, he takes 12. Excuse me. But I can tap his guy with Merrow Reejerey, so it's going to be 17 coming his way. So, yeah, we saw really inexperienced play there where the opponent mulliganed a strong hand for the Dredge deck, but a hand without hate. I guess, you know, he didn't see any hate in the second game, so you wouldn't think that he would feel totally obligated to mulligan to hate against Relic of Progenitus. I guess he saw white, so he might have been thinking about Rest in Peace as well. But yeah, mulligan to 5 against bonkers Merfolk hand. Merfolk's going to take it pretty much every time. So yeah, that's it. It's a little bit of a primer, I guess, this video on things to look out for when you're playing against Dredge, which is just becoming super duper popular with the new card Prized Amalgam from Shadows over Innistrad. If you guys have any questions or comments, please let me know. I think I might have pointed out some mistakes that I made, certainly pointed out some things that the opponent did. But if you see anything else, please share your observations. That's like one of the best things about having this YouTube channel is I get all of your guys' feedback. So it's good to be back playing Magic again. Hopefully I will upload a lot more videos in the near future. So I'll catch you all later.